So let's get started. Procurement metrics that matter, best in class versus everybody else. Or said another way, what does the data tell us distinguishes best in class procure to pay organizations? And we don't really want this to just be about scorecarding performance between best in class and everyone else. We want you to walk away with at least one great idea that you could implement in your own organization. Okay, so here are some of the data points we'll go through during this session. Again, the numbers aren't always the most important thing. They don't always speak for themselves. So we'll dive into some of the key findings and the story behind these numbers as we move along. But essentially, this is the agenda for the presentation today. So to help really build on the story and understand the numbers, we've brought together two experts in this space, Andrew Bartolini from Ardent Partners to share the latest research in this area, and Gerard Cardillo from Charles River Labs, and he's going to be sharing some practical advice based on his real world experience, really cool career leading world-class procurement organizations. And that advice will be things that you can put to work in your own organization. For the past few years, Apex has been building really stronger relationships with procurement organizations, and it's been a priority for us. And when we were first getting started in this, we asked our clients and contacts who they listened to in the market, who they relied on for best practices in the procurement space. And they referred us to Ardent Partners and the great work Arden is doing for procurement and the strategic sourcing buyer. And we were aware of Ardent, but weren't as closely engaged. But we have been over the past few years. And Andrew Bartolini founded Ardent Partners and leads research for the company. And in planning today's discussion, we thought who better to speak to what is distinguishing the highest performing procurement organizations today, and what did the numbers say they're doing differently. And then Gerard, at Apex, we kind of know our experiences, the best advice we get and insights come from those really special leaders in the space who live procure to pay every day, but also who are these special kinds of strategic thinkers, leaders who've learned what works and what doesn't, and they create these frameworks to help others really cut through the noise and get results. And that's Gerard. We first worked with Gerard when Apex performed a contract compliance audit for AstraZeneca several years ago. And Gerard will talk about how audit and contract compliance audits kind of fit in today's topic. But also he's going to be providing a lot of other information really from that first experience that we had with Gerard. And through the years since then, we've seen that the broader Apex clients and procurement communities really rely on Gerard for well thought out practical advice. And I can't wait for you to hear what he has to share today. Some really cool frameworks. And just as an aside, you may want to start following Gerard on LinkedIn. He's really prolific and has a lot of great advice just outside the context of this webinar today. And I want you to be a part of this discussion as well. If you have anything to contribute as we go along, any comments or questions, tips, lessons learned, just raise them in the chat box and we'll get to them as we go along. We've also blocked off a good bit of time at the end for any questions, but we want this to be interactive and find that these conversations go really well if they're interactive as we go along. All right, so Gerard, for those who may not be familiar with Charles River Labs, tell us a little bit about the company and that really important role that you all have played in the events of the last year.
Well, thank you very much. And I really hope I live up to that incredible introduction. I do look forward to linking in with anybody who's on the line today. So please feel free to send an invite. As mentioned, my name is Gerard Cardillo. I'm the Executive Director of Category Procurement at Charles River Labs. Just a little bit about the company in that here at CRL, we support the entire pharmaceutical life cycle. So everything from basic research through lab animals to discovery, which is wet lab work, to safety assessment, where we test drugs to ensure that they're safe before they get put into humans, and then supporting our clients' clinical trials as well as their manufacturing. So we touch 85% of what's approved by the FDA every year. So that's true for the last couple of years. And that holds true basically for Canada and Western Europe as well. We also had the privilege of working on 40 different vaccines or therapies in support of COVID, and worked on all the approved vaccines that I hope that everybody had an opportunity to get to ensure they're healthy and can get back to normal. Just a little bit about what my team has done during COVID, and that we switched from driving strategies to ensure service and price and innovation to making sure we had enough supplies on site to get things done. I'll mention that a little bit later in the presentation, but I'm very pleased to say that never have I been in a company in the 30 years that I've been in procurement where the procurement got mentioned more by the CEO because we're able to deliver against the remit. So a real great story to tell, and I'll mention a little bit of that later on. You go to the next page. I like to say that CRL is the biggest company that you've never heard of. We're 18,000 employees in 100 sites in about 30 countries with a $2.9 billion top line revenue projected for the year. That's against a $1.7 billion revenue when I joined mid-year 2017. We're approximately 50% or greater in every market we compete in. The stock markets really like that growth. We've grown from about $135 a share early last year to $353 per share as of when I put together this slide. Yesterday it was at $366.75, so we're going in the right direction. Not all that growth is organic. We're a very acquisitive company, and we've had either one or two M&As every year since 2015, depending on the size of the target. We did take our foot off the pedal in 2020 and didn't do any mergers then, but came out of the chute strong in 2021 with the purchase of Cognate and Biogene, both of which are CDMOs, so contract manufacturers for the biologic space. Back to you, Danny.
Yeah, so Charles River, it's a company that's all about making other companies look good, which is a really neat place to be, valuable place to be in the market. For those of you who may not be familiar with apexanalytix, the world's largest companies use Apex software and services. They're protecting over $6 trillion of spend annually with those products and services. They're preventing or recovering overpayments. They're identifying control gaps, preventing fraud, and managing supplier relationships. The company's been around for over 30 years, and what clients really love about Apex is our focus on relationships. We help our clients and the individuals we work with achieve their goals, which means we're helping them establish, preserve, and grow their own relationships with one another and with their suppliers. And we help them by paying attention to the details that they may not have the time to pay attention to. The main products that we provide to clients are all about creating this ultimate supplier management relationship. We perform more commercial AP recovery audits than any provider in the world. And because of that, we really already know your suppliers, who they are, how they account for things like return goods, who the best contacts are there, and how best to engage them to identify and productively resolve exceptions. First Strike is the software we use in our audits to identify duplicate payments and other kinds of overpayments. And a good number of our clients are using that software proactively day in and day out to identify and even prevent overpayments that slip through the cracks of their normal ERP controls. And then they use Apex Portal software to onboard and manage 100% of their suppliers. So they're using the solution to control any change to the vendor master, ensure compliance, prevent fraud, and automatically enroll suppliers in all of their strategic programs. And supporting all of those is our Smart VM technology that combines our 40 million record golden supplier records with over 650 external data sources to automatically clean, validate, enrich, and continuously monitor vendor master data. So you can see how all of these solutions kind of work together to optimize procure to pay, and it's why we're interested in understanding procurement better and creating relationships with the procurement community. So Andrew, tell us a bit about Ardent and the Procurement Metrics That Matter report.
Great. Thanks, Danny. Hello, everybody. Thanks for the great intro, Danny, and the kind words. So Arden Partners, we are an industry analyst firm that specializes in supply management. So the entirety of what we do focuses on the source to pay or source to settle process. And we do a bunch of different things, and if you want, you can visit the Ardent Partners or CPO Rising logos, the sites behind me for more information. But we publish two types of research. The first is research that guides organizations on how to think about the solution provider market and which solutions are best for your specific requirements and specific budgets. And then the second type of research, if you go to the next slide, is the kind of research that we're talking about today. And that's best practice research, right? So we, over the past 12 years, have done more market research in the sourcing, procurement, accounts payable, and supply management space than any other firm. And what we're presenting today is our 2021, key research findings that we also publish in a state of the market report, but then translate the key metrics that matter and other information into an ebook, which is also the basis of this presentation. Just want to share a little bit of the demographic information that backs the data that we're presenting today. The first is that this is drawn from more than 350 practitioners coming almost predominantly from procurement, a few coming from supply chain, a few coming from finance. From an industry standpoint, I think one of the great things about procurement is that there's a great commonality. And so this is drawn from 29 distinct industries. The data does tilt towards the large enterprise, which we describe as companies that have revenues greater than $1 billion annually. So that's about 2/3 coming from that segment. And then geographically, the data does tilt towards North America, about 70% with the rest globally.
Great. All right, so let's dive into what the report says. First, let's talk about the growing trend in supplier enablement or enabled suppliers. And really, overall, businesses have enabled about 38% of their suppliers. 34% of their suppliers. But best-in-class companies are about 20% ahead. And how are they doing this? Well, at Apex, we're seeing this being accomplished in a couple of ways. One is we're seeing a big difference between companies that make enrollment in their automation solutions, automated e-procurement solutions, e-invoicing, electronic payments, they're making that, some companies are making that enrollment happen sometime after the supplier has onboarded. So they get a supplier on board and the supplier starts to transact with them, and then the company tries to get them to move onto these platforms. But the ones that are having the most success are doing the opposite. They're making enablement in automation solutions part of the supplier onboarding process. So the vendor master doesn't get created in the ERP system until the supplier has agreed and completed the steps to enroll in the automation process. And so they just, in our client's case, they're building that enrollment and the communication of the requirement right into the online supplier registration process. So the supplier is filling out all of their information, like their addresses and contacts and banking information. And they're also at that point signing up for a Rebo or getting it enrolled in Coupo or Tradeshift or whatever the appropriate automation solution is for their environment. And so because this is being communicated up front, just adoption is a lot higher because suppliers are more interested in complying with your requirements as they're establishing their relationship than they are farther down the road. So Gerard, can you talk about some of the types of enablement that you've seen?
Oh, absolutely. So what I've seen, Danny and Andrew, is that more and more of our suppliers are leveraging e-catalog punch out type technology to drive enablement. And the ones that don't have it are actually going out to consolidators and to exchanges so that they can appear to have it. I can tell you, our procurement organization is heavily leveraging those exchanges to facilitate enablement with our suppliers. More importantly, we're selling through those exchanges while we're building that digital capability for ourselves so that we can have a kind of digital customer experience for our customers.
Right. So one thing I think that's important to mention, since we're focused so much on the best in class, and before I talk about supplier enablement, is that what that term means from the research perspective. And so when we're referring to the best in class, what we're talking about is the top 20% of procurement organizations based upon several performance and operational metrics. When it comes to supplier enablement, I think that what makes the supply management, the procure to pay technologies very unique is that, for there to be true success, for there to be true value derived from the investment in the technology, we're reliant on a third party to become engaged and actually utilize the technology as well. And so that's very different from an internal finance system or an internal HR system, right? So you're reliant on the third party to actually generate value, and that third party obviously is the suppliers. And what the best in class have done, besides adopting technology to a greater degree, is that the depth in which they pursue their digital transformations is gone far beyond the classic Pareto analysis, right? Organizations used to say, well, if we get the 20% of our suppliers, that's going to be sufficient. The reality is that there's an extraordinary amount of value that the best in class are driving from being able to transact and communicate and collaborate with more than 50% of their suppliers. And
so I think what you both are pointing to is there's getting the supplier on a platform, but then there's what is the supplier doing on that platform? Are they doing everything that the platform supports? And the more that they can adopt, the better the outcomes are for you as a buyer. And I think you've also mentioned, Andrew, that these numbers have been pretty stable over time, or at least over the past couple of years, right? Enablement's not necessarily going up as a trend. It's about depth.
Yeah, I would say absolutely right. I mean, where the best in class have differentiated themselves in a variety of factors, as we'll continue to cover as we go forward. But one of the foundational areas that the best in class has had a very clear lead is in their use of technology, right? And so, we see what we're showing you here is that the best in class at the application level, right? So spend analysis or contracts or e-sourcing, e-procurement have adopted solutions, up to almost twice as often or twice as frequently. But the story for the best in class is not necessarily that they have the technology in place. It's that they've really worked to make it part of their business process, right? It is the default, right? Organizations are best in class organizations are utilizing technology to a much greater degree. They're getting much greater leverage out of that, right? They've enabled significantly more of their suppliers, but the volumes of transactions and the throughput that they have on those systems is significantly greater as well, as is their technology proficiency, right? And so, they have understood that the use of technology allows them to scale their best practices, to codify their best practices, and to then go and improve upon them. So, a very clear characteristic is the best in class adoption and use of technology.
Yeah, cool. So moving on to the next stat, we were talking about this data a few days ago, and I was at first surprised to see the savings numbers on these two basketballs. So it says best in class savings rate is 7.5%, and all other savings rate is 7.3%. So essentially, companies across the spectrum appear to be saving about 7.5% on through their procurement controls processes. And, I was just kind of surprised by that. I thought that meant that really there was not much difference between best in class companies and others, but you guys were quick to point out, because you understand it better than I do. But you guys said, no, you're not looking at the numbers in context. Those aren't total savings rates. Those are relative savings rates. And then you explained how actually there's a huge difference in savings between these two groups. So Andrew, why don't you just walk everyone through that, the logic behind it?
Right. So first, I always start off with, when we talk about best in class rates, what we're trying to show the audience is what the leading organizations are doing from a performance standpoint. It's not necessarily that you need to go after and invest and go after each of the specific metrics and to that level, right? But it's just showing you that these numbers are possible. When it comes to savings, right? So savings is always a challenging performance metric for procurement, right? Because it does control the ultimate number to a degree, but in many other cases, it's dealing with factors beyond its control. And so, just as context for savings in and of itself. But what we see here on this chart and what we see in our research is that best in class organizations have almost 90% of total spend under their management. This means that they are influencing and touching and able to visualize and add value to almost 90% of all enterprise spend. And you see that the all others, right? The other 80%, it's a little bit more than 50%. Now, the savings rates and where the phenomenal leverage in best-in-class organizations is that 7.5% savings rate is applied to a much larger spend portfolio, right? So they're saving 7.5% on 90% of their spend, whereas the all others group are saving 7.3 on 56% of their spend. And when you look at an organization that has billions of dollars in spend, this translates into tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of bottom line impact that a best-in-class organization is doing versus their peers. It's phenomenal. And Gerard, I know you've got some thoughts here on the data.
Absolutely, Andrew. And I couldn't agree more. That metric of spend under management is really the key determining factor in your success as a procurement organization. So if we can go to the next slide. Once you have that spend under management, there are some very simple plays that you can run to drive significant amounts of value for your organization. Now, look, we can get into risk reduction and supplier relationship management, et cetera, in the finer points of procurement value driving, but essentially, if you deploy 3 relatively simple game plans, you're going to drive the bulk of your value. First, it's economies of scale. From a supplier perspective, more spend is a lot better than less spend. So this is where you start getting the milestone rebates, volume price reductions. More importantly, you may very well even get a team supporting your business, and you're certainly going to get more customer service if you're a bigger piece of their business. Second, competition. Suppliers do better when they compete for your business. By competing your business, not only do you get best price, but you also get line of sight for what that price relationship to service and delivery is, so that you can very well then use that benchmark data going forward to, if I ratchet down price, how's that going to impact my service and delivery? If I ratchet up my service and delivery, how's that going to impact my price? So it gives you wonderful benchmarks to then make better decisions going forward. And last but not least, demand and specification rationalization. Far too often, we gold plate the goods and services we buy just in case. So I always recommend that you take a step back and you rationalize what you're buying to ensure that it's fit for purpose. You know, there's no need to gold plate this stuff. Why buy a Ferrari when a Chevy pickup truck is really what you need? I don't know, and I'll turn it back to you guys.
Thanks, Coach.
I'm sorry. I'm picking up with. I'm going to stay with it. My bad. So let's go to the next slide.
So I actually have a question here. Someone was asking about the numbers, and I believe it's from the previous slide. Do the numbers reflect direct or indirect spend? And let me just.
Right. So the spend under management number reflects both, right? So, we do let each organization determine what that target is, right? So, but, from the classic view, total spend would include direct, it would include indirect, it would include services. Where there's sometimes a delta within organizations is whether they have purview over capital spend or not. So we look at the entirety of that spend and what percentage does the procurement organization manage or influence.
Yeah, if I could add to that, but there are spends that that certainly should be pulled out, right? Settlement of lawsuits, taxes,
right.
Things such as that, which certainly come out of the addressable spend.
That's a great point.
Great. Okay, Gerard, back to you.
All right, so if we can go to the next slide. Yeah, as Danny mentioned earlier, contract compliance is near and dear to my heart. When I first engaged Apex to come do a contract compliance audit for us at AstraZeneca, we found millions in overpaid fees, as well as millions in fees that should have been returned to us when projects were canceled. So while the business is ultimately responsible for review and approval of invoices, let's be honest, they're not validating what's on that invoice versus what's in the contract. Hence you really do need to kind of take a look at your entire P2P process with engage your AP/shared services folks, bring in your procurement folks, and to ensure that you're being compliant to your contracts. And those are the contracts that folks like me and my team have expended exceptional amounts of time sourcing and rigorously negotiating. So you don't want to kind of leave that money on the table, since you've already gotten that in the negotiation and in the contract. Danny, you're on mute.
Mute.
That's the quote that comes out of COVID. You're on mute.
Okay. Yeah. So can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this just reminds me of I've got a pretty extensive experience in the AP side of all of this, and um, around AP automation. And really, if AP doesn't have a process in place to enforce the no PO, no pay rules, or the vendor masters are such a mess that AP can't find the right POs, then all this spend management effort just falls apart. And just one specific example that's kind of harder to catch and that can come up in a contract compliance audit. We've got this, a client told this story a month or so ago. They had a digital marketing agency and they'd done this really great job of managing that spend. They had contracts in place. They'd negotiated some good savings that were locked in by the contract. And it was really only after we did our audit that they found they'd prepaid for some work, which was allowed by contract. It needed to be prepaid so they could buy ads. But the prepayment was for more than the vendor actually delivered and more than they were actually entitled to. And there wasn't a process to get that money back or to even verify that the services had been delivered. And so it took an audit to identify that overpayment and identify that control gap. And really identifying the control gap is ultimately the goal. We recovered the overpayment, yeah, but really closing that control gap and putting in a process to prevent that loss of contract effectiveness to work, closing that gap so it never happens again was really the ultimate goal. And if you look at this, the data on this page, it shows 78% where the spend is compliant. It's all about that 22% gap, that 22% leakage between the contract compliance spend and the savings that you actually negotiated with your supplier.
That's right. I mean, and there's a cost to that 22%. Like, let's be very clear, right? This is the maverick spend that is being spent with rogue suppliers or non-contracted suppliers, non-strategic suppliers. There's an erosion of value that happens with the procurement organization. And when I think about compliance, right? If I were to go to Coach Gerard's analogy of football, right? Really, what this is are you running the playbook that are you running your own playbook, right? And bringing in an organization like Apex to do the quality control to ensure that that you're doing so, can provide tremendous leverage as you go forward, right? And I think the interesting thing that we see here with the data is that most of the metrics with procurement sort of churn along sort of slowly up and to the right over time. Over the past couple of years, we've seen these numbers really bounce to levels that are much more commensurate to the level of spend that's actually being managed. And I think it's an indication that organizations realize that yes, you can drive value through strategic sourcing, but sometimes if you've already done most of the work, all you need to do is look back at what's already been done and just make sure you're running those right plays to deliver the most value.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I'll just add that for me, you never really know how compliant you are to your contracts unless you perform an audit. The old adage of trust but verify, couldn't be more true in this case.
So we have another question, and Gerard, I'm going to give it to you because we can't give it to Danny because the question, Gerard, you're the practitioner right now, and so do you recommend a third-party audit firm to review contract compliance? So Danny, you're not allowed to answer.
I absolutely do. I've had, much of us have had success because we were smart enough to bring in the folks that we needed to ensure that success. You can't do this stuff but through the strength of your own back. Bring in a third party. They pay for themselves, I assure you, and this allows for an agnostic look that also comes with recommendations on how to fix it, and it's a continuous improvement process. Sometimes procurement can be the stay-at-home parent who just sounds like white noise in the background. Bring in a third party to validate that voice.
Great. Okay, I'll move you to the next slide now.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add, Matthew, there's certainly value in you having your own internal organization that's looking at contract compliance, maybe for prioritized contracts, but a third-party view helps too.
So I know we've been very focused on procurement metrics so far, and so these are some metrics that it's a mix of procurement and non-procurement metrics that are near and dear to my heart that really help you gauge the success and the efficiency of the program. So DPO versus DSO, right? Are you paying your suppliers faster than your customers are paying you? That's a key metric. And if that's the case, you know, things are upside down and you have to address it. Flip side, if your customers are paying you faster than you're paying your suppliers, even if the metric isn't great, as long as you have that positive flow, you're going in the right direction. On-time payment is the key that unlocks all other supplier value. It's a non-starter. If you can't pay your suppliers on time, chances are that you're not going to be the customer of choice. We drive on-time payments by closely watching blocked invoices that are due to either price discrepancies or lack of GRs, lack of goods receipts, and that helps us keep on top of that. You got to have your spend on purchase order, right? So if you're not touching it, if you can't see it, you can't impact it. Once you have that, then it flows down to your percent of spend sourced, going back to that managed spend, going from 56%, you know, up to 86%. That's really where you can catch your value. And then I go to the efficiency and effectiveness metrics that I think really matter to the business, right? Is it easy to use procurement, and can I enhance the speed to market? So with that, percent of your invoices that have two-way match versus three-way match, percent of electronic invoices, your percent of electronic ordering through those punch-out catalogs and platforms that I mentioned before. No touch ordering. So those could be orders that have no procurement involvement whatsoever, right? So we've already solidified the deal. We have a preferred supplier in place. Why do we need to touch it again? Let it flow. And also, we're starting to drive orders that have no touch with regard to no delegation of authority. If it's a small dollar order, office supplies, and somebody has innate delegation of authority, why should it escalate to their line manager? Let it flow, right? So get that speed, be more efficient. And that's my perspective on metrics, and I'll turn it back over.
Yeah, so, you know, all of this points to just trying to automate the controls as much as possible, right? Make things easy for people through the last point here, no touch ordering via punch out catalog. You're just baking in all of your controls and all of your spend management into a process that's really easy for your end users. And easier, in a way, it's easier for them to follow the rules than not follow the rules. And that's really what all of this is about. It's what our clients are thinking about when they're trying to automate supplier onboarding or invoice and payment status online or fraud controls, all of that. It's just all about making the controlled environment easier to use than the non-controlled environment.
Can I just add to that? Sun Tzu once said, armies follow the path of least resistance. They're like water. They follow the path of least resistance. Same thing with stakeholders. Make it easy for them and they'll comply.
Yeah.
Great point.
So, Andrew, I think we're to our last slide. What's the menu?
Great.
There we go. Yeah, what's the menu for best-in-class procurement?
Right. So I mean, it's a great, right. So when you read the ebook, when you go through and you do the data, right. And so I've been doing research in the procurement space, working in the procurement space for about 25 years, doing, market research for 16, 17 years now. what we've seen over what I've seen over that period of time is that we've really come to a point where the procurement profession has matured, has become sophisticated, right? There's now a codified set of actions and things that you can do, right? A playbook, if you will, that a CPO can come in and utilize to drive value, right? They know that if you give me these types of this level of investment and resources on this amount of spend, you're going to get this type of results. And so, when we look at best in class procurement organizations, there are many characteristics that stand out across the talent, across the operations, across the systems, or people, process, and technology. If we just look at quickly at each of those, right? I think that best in class procurement organizations are almost always led by a very strong and experienced leader at the top, right? And that they have a strong procurement leadership team as well. The organization, has become more fluid, maybe less hierarchical, but the ability to rise within the organization, is well defined, and there's investment in staff training and in resources that make the organization more intelligent. From a systems standpoint, right, we talked about the adoption of technology, right? So putting the technology in place and then making it the default process, becoming more proficient, and then utilizing the visibility dividend, utilizing the efficiency dividend to greater impact, right? Becoming a smarter, more intelligent organization, right? You see, one of the largest opportunities that we see for procurement organizations over the next decade is in their ability to take data and to translate procurement's big data into much larger value, becoming a smarter, more intelligent organization. And then from a standard operations standpoint, right, it's really about standardizing and automating. And so that's just a taste.
Cool. Many more details in the ebook, which everybody on this call will get access to. All right. So we want to open the floor back up for more questions, or maybe you've got some tips that you'd like to share with the group, or ideas, or maybe you think we've said something that you disagree with. So raise that too. In the meantime, we've put up this really a poll. It's a way for you to request more information about best practices, and if you're interested, apexanalytix solutions. We'll be happy to follow up after the presentation with any of this information to you. But in the meantime, we'll shift over into Q&A. Matthew, do you have some questions for us?
Yes, I have some questions. So we're going to go with Andrew first. When you were conducting the research, you were asking a lot of questions of procurement professionals. What were they asking of you?
What were the procurement professionals asking of Ardent?
Yeah, of you while you're doing this research, because you're picking their brains. That the question is kind of like, what information were they looking for from you during this conversation?
Yeah, so I think that procurement, so probably interviewed about maybe close to 30 CPOs as part of the research process this year. I would say that with those conversations and conversations that we have throughout the year, procurement executives are always interested in understanding what's the next big trend, right? So where are the smart organizations going? What are they doing? And how can we mirror that, right? And so, the answer to that would be, I alluded to in the last slide, right, is big data. Right, is becoming a more intelligent organization. It's agility. It's being able to handle and navigate a pandemic that completely shifts your workforce, that completely shifts your supply chain, at least temporarily, and being able to continue operations and continue to drive value. So I think that a big question is, for those that are curious, right? And I always think that it takes to lead a large organization successfully, it requires some type of reflection and curiosity about what it is that you're doing. So, the forward-looking questions are usually the starting point.
Yeah, you made an interesting point there, Andrew, about wanting to know information about other companies. And historically, surveys like this have been the primary way, and I think they continue to play a primary role in sharing that information. But we see companies wanting to share more tactical information, and they understand that they can't really share specific information about their own supplier relationships, specific buyer-supplier relationships. They just feel like those need to be protected. And so they've been looking for ways to share information maybe in a little bit more of an anonymized way. And so we're seeing that play out in a couple of areas. One is, what do you know about this supplier? Do you have information about the supplier, or does the network out there have information about the supplier that I don't have that is fair for me to know? Like, are they a diverse supplier? Have other companies been successful using this supplier in their operations? Then, well, maybe I want to consider using them as well. Or what industry are they in? What products do they provide? Or even bigger things like, what are the payment terms that are being used out there? Not what do people say their payment terms are, but what are their actual payment terms? We've been working with clients to help create anonymized data and predictive analytics that help them get that insight, which is what we're seeing related to what you just said.
Right, and that's extremely valuable, right? I'd say that the ability to tap into other resources, particularly peer sets, and if you can anonymize it, fantastic.
So another question that I think everyone can chime in about, it's something I don't think we mentioned, is AI. And someone asked, how do you see AI working within the procurement environment? So Gerard, why don't you want to comment first? Or who has? Am I putting you on the spot?
A little bit. Let me defer to Andrew on that one.
Okay. Sure. So, one, I think that, AI has the potential to, help with this, what we expect over the next decade to be a massive shift in the way that organizations understand, organize, and execute procurement practices. We had seen, the money ball for procurement concept, right? And so we have seen organizations take data and analyze it in a way that really changes how they undergo their activities, right? We see it in professional sports, we see it in online advertising. We think that procurement in 2030, when we're talking about the metrics that matter, it's likely that those metrics are going to be different than what we're talking about today. Now, AI is one of the technology tools that is going to really help manifest that change, right? So AI, can enhance your analytical capabilities, within your systems today, or within, the people that you have, and really do the type of analysis that you wouldn't otherwise be possible, and then get smarter while also doing it. So we think that AI, which is a tag that's being put on almost every type of technology today, so not everything is AI yet, but the concept and the idea of analyzing data, having the system help guide decision making, and have the system itself become smarter as you go forward, are going to be very key concepts and very key tools as we go forward.
Yeah, if I could just add a couple of tactical examples of that. We just started to put our toe in the water with using AI to predict what suppliers that we could potentially leverage that we're already using. So if a supplier does X, Y, and Z for us, they may very well do A, B, and C. And as opposed to creating a new supplier relationship that brings along all that additional risk and supplier management, well, why don't we look at these suppliers that have been identified through AI? There's also some kind of neat tools that are being developed and rolled out there with regard to using AI for contracting, right? So if you're buying A, B, and C, you most likely need these terms and conditions built into your dynamic contract templates. So there's some really interesting uses where as little as 2 years ago, no one would ever have thought that this capability would be here.
Yeah, if I could add to that, where we're seeing our clients asking us to help them and in ways that have an AI component. Risk management is a really interesting place where AI is being applied. You know, there's been this concept of monitoring negative news around suppliers for a long time. What most people discovered, if they subscribed to negative news, their inboxes were being flooded with just complaints about the biggest companies in the world. And they weren't really getting the curated content that they needed to assess real business risk. New AI tools, natural language processing, and reading sentiment out of news articles are being applied to filter news to the subject matter that is specific to procurement risk. So fraud, financial risk, reputational risk, operational, geographic considerations. And the tools are pretty cool about saying, okay, here are specific articles that are in the world today about your supplier that suggest some sort of financial risk. Maybe the CFO is selling off all of that person's stock. Is that something you should be worried about? I don't know. Or maybe there's some sort of controversy that could impact your reputation. So the AI is being used to digest the world of media to bring forward the type of information that you might want to have to manage risk. Lots of predictive analytics that are built on machine learning and analyzing large data sets across networks of companies to predict which payment terms would a given supplier accept? What would they take early payments or not? And who inside that company is going to be the most responsive to communicate with you if you have an issue you need to resolve? When should you contact them? So just analysis of large data sets are helping to optimize procurement processes.
So I have one more question for Gerard, but if anyone else has a question, just please submit it. It is, we've been talking about procurement, best in class, and someone's asking, what are your internal stakeholders asking of procurement, especially right now?
I can tell you what they're not asking for. They're not asking, well, how do I become compliant to the procurement policy and how can I generate savings? Right? They're looking for solutions to their problems. One, they certainly want speed to market. Can it be easy? How do we make this easier? And then, of course, how do we address their goals and objectives? Right? So they might have a gap in their budget. They might have a large project that's coming down the pike that will result in revenue generating activity. So these are the things that they want to have solved so that they make their goals and objectives. Once you're solving for their goals and objectives, you then become a trusted partner, a true member of the team. Now, I've had conversations with my procurement colleagues, but those questions are very different, right? Procurement colleagues are asking about strategies and tactics and how to manage those how to employ those strategies and tactics against the market realities, right? We talked about economies of scale and competition. Well, you certainly don't want to deploy those strategies when you have a market that everything is 5x the price that it was last year, and there are some markets like that during COVID. So it's more about risk management and supply redundancy, et cetera. So the procurement folks will talk more about the finer points of strategy and tactics versus what's going on in the marketplace. And of course, things like how to optimize small and diverse business spend while driving value through leverage relationships and of course risk reduction and reputational risks, et cetera. But certainly very different questions that are being asked by the internal stakeholders. But the internal stakeholders do not want to hear about savings and compliance.
Thank you, Gerard. So that's the end of our questions. I don't know if anyone had another comment, but we're hitting our time right now. Oh, maybe there. Oh, wait, I think something's coming in. Oh, no. So if you submit any questions, we'll get back. We'll follow up with you. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. You will be receiving the Ardent Partners Procurement Metrics That Matter report in a follow-up email. And if you have any other questions, we'd love to follow up with you. So thank you all panelists today. Have a great day.
Thank you. Cheers.